Hello, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Jody, and this is Word on the Web. And today we have a very special guest, someone I consider a friend, partner, and board member. This is Mary Cronin.
Hi, Jody. Hi, Nathan.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the
Thanks
Word
for
on the
joining
Web
us.
table.
Thanks for having me
Yeah,
today.
yeah, it's quite an elevation for
Right?
you, I imagine.
Here we
yeah.
go. Here we go.
Mary has been with St. Luke's for over 20 years, and she actually came to us. She got to our board because we had this incredible board member, Kelly Wood. He was an angel, and he actually did so many special things for our organization. And the last great thing he did before he passed away was he invited Mary to join our board. And Mary has really taken on the persona of Kelly. She totally gets how to be a board member and to lean in.
Support us.
And support the staff and see the guests. And so she's made such a big difference in, when I need something, I call Mary.
Yeah.
And she answers the phone,
She
which is real.
answers the
Thank
phone.
you for answering the phone.
Oh,
Yes.
thanks for having me. I remember that day that Kelly gave me the call, and Kelly was such just a mentor in my life. And, that person who's like, Mary, you got this. And he's like, hey, you think those babes are old enough that you can kind of take on, a little bit more community engagement? And I still remember what he said about you. This organization is a unique nonprofit in our community. They're innovative, they're ahead of their time. And, when I first joined, it was a little bit like, oh, how do I help? And you kind of put your arm around me and gave me that opportunity to really see our staff and to really support the new shelter. So I appreciate that. It's been a really an incredibly meaningful 5 years.
Well, you've brought a lot of meaning to your role.
Well, and speaking of innovative and ahead of our time, one of the most fascinating things that happens on the tours, the many tours that we've given, is that people are surprised by the integrated medical dorm. And
At the new shelter
At the new
home.
shelter.
Yeah.
At the new shelter home. So we felt like this would be a really good opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, because when we began the idea of the new shelter home, we obviously wanted to maintain programming that we've been able to lift up during COVID, which was that hotel shelter and the medically fragile program, which really was created in partnership with St. Luke's. And so we, in fact, designed the medical dorm and clinic, and then we needed help actually making that happen. And so talk to me a little bit about how you were able to get St. Luke's to be so on board.
I think it's, COVID was an interesting time for all of us, and it really gave us an opportunity to kind of take a step back and say, how can we do our work differently and better because of this constraint? And, I think for most of us that maybe haven't had an opportunity to engage one-on-one with our guests or be part of the work that we do, I think you have something in your mind of who needs our services, and being new with the board, the whole idea of the medically fragile was something that kind of opened my mind. And what became apparent was how our guests at Interfaith are also our patients at St. Luke's.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what if we took a step back, and what if we designed something that maybe kept them more on the guest side and not on the patient side?
Yeah.
And, our community is growing. I wasn't born here, but I was raised here. And, our emergency departments are overflowing with primary care need. And so really the work that you started to say, how does primary care look differently? How does getting folks discharged out of the hospital where they're not surrounded with their support system, how do we reimagine that, get them back to their support system as quickly as possible, because we know they're going to heal better and they're going to recover faster. And, it just kind of started this dialogue back and forth on just reimagining that. And, I really think the vision for the medical dorm kind of flowed from that reimagination.
Yeah, and the idea is, you're exactly right, that when there is someone in our community that's unhoused and they're in the hospital, there's a time where they're not sick enough to warrant being on a medical floor, but they're far too sick to discharge to the street or back to a emergency shelter. And so that's where, like, that hotel taught us that respite piece, having the ability to bring home health and hospice to guests in a settled community, a safe space where they can be day and night, that allows them to heal, to have the support of our team nutritionally with case management, but then having the medical support from the medical teams that come through. It was a game changer, and it was life-changing. You know, people thrived because of it, or survived because of it,
Yeah,
or
survived.
they had a dignified end of life
Right.
because of it. So St. Luke's kind of helped to take what was created at the hotel, and then they moved that support to the new medical dorm. They're donating all the medical beds. They're donating 24/7 virtual doctors, so that we really do have ways to keep our guests supported in our new building and not utilize the emergency medicine system, not call 911, really have consistent kind of care through our other partnership with Full Circle and Terry Riley with that day-to-day clinical needs. So the St. Luke's group is a group that just says yes. And I have to imagine it had a lot to do with you, because you're understanding and seeing it in real time.
Yeah, you know, it's an honor to have an opportunity to build something better. You know, about the time that I joined the board, you know, my mother-in-law passed away from a glioblastoma, a brain tumor, and that was really my first experience with hospice. And, you know, that was a challenging enough situation where she was able to do end of life at her own home at the same exact time that we provided our first end of life within, you know, the medically fragile unit at the hotel. And if you take a step back, there's not a person on the St. Luke's team that doesn't hear that story and their face goes, oh my goodness, end of life care. I had never even thought about that, you know, especially as each of us get the opportunity to have a loved one go through end of life care. That is a very challenging situation. And so to be able to foster something that, you know, creates an environment where you can bring in the right services, where folks are surrounded by their friends and family, like what an unbelievable thing that many of us take for granted. That we were able to simply say, you were, well, what if? What if that actually is something that our guests and all of our community members can count on? And so it's just an incredible opportunity for us to be able to do something really small, which is donate our end of service beds. I mean, that is so small in comparison to the impact that you and your team are going to be able to have on these people's lives. So thank you.
Maybe small, but very meaningful to the individuals who are on the receiving end of that. And it's very meaningful to us to be able to offer that.
And it's, the partnerships are the only way we can get this done. As a privately funded organization, we lean into our partners to imagine it and then also to be able to make it happen. And so, and the thing with that hospice, that learning that we had at the hotel, one of the greatest fears of our unhoused population is dying alone and not being found. It is something that they speak about often. And when we did move that end-of-life care to the hotel, not only did they have a place to be in medical support, but they had this community of guests that cared about them. Like one of the guests who was in end-of-life had a dog. And our guests took that dog on walks and took care of that dog, and they sat at his bedside, and he did not pass alone at all. And there was a memorial for him at the hotel because they were all family. And so it changed his perspective as far as he was alone when he was diagnosed as a dying man, but he died surrounded. So that's a gift that we want to keep being able to give to.
And for those that haven't been through the new shelter home, it has 2 dedicated rooms, 2 dedicated spaces for end of life or palliative care. So it's great.
It's so
Yeah.
exciting.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, it's always, it's really, it's nice. Like the word on the web gives us a way to say thank you by sharing the stories to our massive audience.
Massive audience.
Our massive worldwide audience, so that they can see the beauty of you and also appreciate that St. Luke's and Boise, Idaho is, they are not just a name, they actually step in and make work happen, and that's a beautiful thing for us.
Really
It's,
engaged in the community and in
Yep.
making the community a better place.
and showing up all the time.
Well, you
So-
are sweet. You know, it's been such, you know, so meaningful for me to be able to work here in this community that I love, you know, for as long as I have, and then to be able to see kind of the bridge of similar, collaborative, and synergistic missions, right? That,
right.
you know, we want folks to heal.
Yeah.
And how do we create environments where, yes, we have the emergency departments for emergencies, but, you know, with families and, you know, a lot of young kids need health care. Maybe it's a sniffle, maybe it's an earache. You know, how can those families access our on-demand virtual clinic from, you know, from the shelter,
Right.
not have to stress about transportation or where do I go or hours of operation? You know, how do we do that? And then how do we, you know, support getting folks out of the inpatient environment as quickly as possible, but they can't go back to, you know, the general population. It's more like a bridge, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the right thing to do. And
It's
so
the support
it
that
is.
they need.
And
Yeah.
to just take a step back and imagine, like, what would have to be true for us to make this better. And that's, you know, why I've found so much joy in working with you, is that that's how you both think, is, well, what would have to be true instead of all of the things that are hard, that are getting in the way. I think, you know, life in the last couple of years have taught us that if you're going to do something meaningful, there's going to be a lot of hard
There's
things
going to be some
Yeah.
that get in
Yeah.
the way
pushback
of doing
and
that,
difficulties
right?
and roadblocks and
You
all
know,
those.
but how do I surround myself with people that, you know, are able to push past that? So I just appreciate the opportunity to try.
Yeah.
We're going to learn a ton on
Yes.
how do we support, you know, our guests better. How do we keep them healthy, keep the families healthy? And, you know, I'm just excited for the next couple of months to really see the impact we can have.
Yeah.
And
There's gonna
Luke's
be-
is excited
There's going to
about
be a
that.
lot of learning.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do
Yeah.
it together like
Yep,
always.
Always.
Well, thank you for joining us on Word on the
Yeah,
Web.
we really appreciate you.
Thanks for
And St.
having me.
Luke's.
Of course, it's been a delight, and we'll be back with you with another exciting partnership story
Yep.
very soon.
Very soon. Thanks,
Cheers.
everybody.